Welcome back to Fear Rest. In today's episode, I'm sharing 7 true disturbing stories from the heart of Appalachia. These are tales of people who ventured into the hollows and forgotten corners of these ancient mountains and found something they were never meant to see. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button and let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Story 1. The property came to me through my aunt's estate, which felt wrong from the start because Aunt Caroline wasn't the kind of person who died quietly in her sleep at 63. She'd been healthy, sharp, walked 5 miles every morning before dawn, but the coroner said heart failure, and nobody in the family wanted to push it. The cabin sat about 40 minutes outside Harlan, Kentucky, tucked into a crease of land, so deep the sun only hit it direct for maybe 3 hours a day. I'd been there twice as a kid. I remembered the wood stove and the smell of sassafras tea, but mostly I remembered how quiet it was. Not peaceful quiet, the kind that made you aware of your own breathing. I drove up on a Thursday in late September because I'd been putting it off since July, and the estate lawyer said I needed to either claim it or sign it over. The road turned to gravel, then to just 2 tire ruts with grass growing between them. My Civic scraped bottom twice. When I finally pulled up to the cabin, I sat in the car for a few minutes, drinking gas station coffee that had gone cold. The cabin looked smaller than I remembered, more tired. Gray boards, a porch that sagged on one side, windows so dirty they looked black. I grabbed my overnight bag and a flashlight, even though it was only 2 in the afternoon. The key stuck in the lock, and when the door finally opened, the smell hit me. Not rot exactly, but old air, like opening something that had been sealed too long. I'm not sure how to describe it. Stale, but also sort of sweet. It made my throat tight. Inside, everything was exactly how Aunt Caroline had left it. A mug on the counter with a brown ring at the bottom. A sweater draped over the back of a chair. Mail stacked on the kitchen table, unopened. I put my bag down and walked through the 3 rooms, just trying to get a feel for the place. The bedroom was dim, the bathroom had a rust stain in the sink, and the main room had that wood stove and 2 rocking chairs facing it. On the mantel there were photos in dusty frames. Aunt Caroline's wedding picture from 1985, my grandmother as a young woman, and one I didn't recognize, a family photo from maybe the 1940s, people standing stiff in front of this same cabin, nobody smiling. I decided to air the place out, so I opened a few windows. The screens were torn, and flies had gotten in at some point. There were dead ones on the sills. I started going through drawers, looking for paperwork, anything that would tell me what bills needed paying or if there was anything valuable I should know about. In the kitchen drawer, I found the usual rubber bands, twist ties, a church directory from 2003, but in the drawer of the small table by the door, I found something odd. It was a composition notebook, the kind kids use for school. The cover was water-stained, and inside Aunt Caroline had written dates and short entries. Not quite a diary, more like observations. The first entry was from April, just 5 months before she died. It walked the tree line again tonight. Same spot as Tuesday, didn't come closer. I flipped through more pages. Most entries were similar, short, almost clinical. Heard it at the spring around 10 p.m. Sounds like water, but heavier. 3 knocks on the back wall. Waited, 3 more. Found marks on the porch rail, not claws, fingers maybe. The last entry was dated 2 days before she died. It knows I've been watching. It stood in the yard last night until I turned off the lamp. I closed the notebook and put it back in the drawer, telling myself it was nothing. Aunt Caroline had been alone up here. Maybe she'd gotten paranoid, imagined things. Old houses make noise. Animals come around. I tried to focus on the task at hand, sorting, cleaning, deciding. But I kept thinking about that last line. It stood in the yard. By the time evening came, I'd made decent progress. I'd bagged up trash, sorted papers into piles, wiped down the kitchen counters. I made myself a sandwich from the bread and peanut butter I'd brought and ate it standing at the counter, looking out the window at the yard. The tree line was maybe 30 yards from the cabin, thick with oak and poplar, undergrowth so dense you couldn't see more than a few feet in. As the light faded, the woods seemed to darken faster than the sky, like they were pulling the dusk into them. I turned on the lamps early, even though I knew it would make it harder to see outside. I tried to read on my phone, but there was no signal. I'd known that would be the case, but it still made me feel cut off. Around 8:30 I heard it, 3 knocks, not on the back wall like the notebook said. On the front door, I froze, my hand still holding my phone. I waited, thinking maybe I'd imagined it, but then it came again. 3 deliberate knocks, evenly spaced, not like someone's knuckles, more like something blunt hitting the wood. I stood up slowly and walked to the door, my heart doing something stupid in my chest. I called out, "Hello." Nothing. I reached for the doorknob, then stopped. Something about the silence after the knocks felt wrong, like whatever had knocked was still there, waiting on the other side. I stepped back and went to the window instead, pulling the curtain aside just enough to look out. The porch was empty, the yard was empty, but at the tree line I saw something. It was pale, standing just inside the shadow of the trees. I couldn't make out details, just a shape, taller than it should be, completely still. I stared at it, trying to convince myself it was a birch tree or a trick of the failing light, but then it moved, not warped, just shifted, like it had been leaning and straightened up. My mouth went dry. I let the curtain fall and stepped back from the window. I told myself I wasn't scared yet, but I also wasn't relaxed. I checked the lock on the door, then checked it again. I went around and made sure every window was latched. Then I sat in one of the rocking chairs and tried to think rationally. Maybe someone was messing with me. Maybe locals knew the cabin was empty and they were trying to scare off whoever showed up. That made more sense than what. I didn't even want to finish the thought. Around 10, I heard the sound. It came from the back of the cabin near the bedroom. At first, I thought it was water, like Aunt Caroline had written, but it was. It was rhythmic, a kind of wet dragging sound, like something being pulled across mud. Then it stopped. Then 3 knocks on the back wall, so hard they made the picture frames rattle. I grabbed the flashlight and went to the bedroom window, shining the light out into the yard. The beam cut through the dark, but I didn't see anything, just weeds and the edge of the woods. I swept the light back and forth, my hand shaking enough that the beam wobbled. Then I saw the marks on the windowsill outside. They were on the outer sill below the glass, long, thin impressions in the old wood, like someone had dragged their fingers down it. 4 lines, then another set, then another, going all the way down to the corner of the house. I backed away from the window so fast I almost tripped on the bed frame. I went back to the main room and stood in the middle of it, trying to decide what to do. I could leave, just grab my stuff and go, drive down the mountain in the dark. But something about running felt worse, like it would know I'd run, like it would follow. I sat back down in the rocking chair and kept the flashlight in my lap. I didn't turn off the lamps, I barely moved. The hours crawled by and the cabin settled and creaked around me, and every sound made my chest tighten. Around midnight, I heard footsteps on the porch. Slow, deliberate, not quite right. The spacing was too even, the weight too heavy on the boards. They stopped at the door. I stared at it, waiting for the knocks, but they didn't come. Instead, I heard breathing. It was low, steady, just on the other side of the door. I could hear it over the sound of my own heartbeat hammering in my ears. Then a voice. "Caroline." It was my voice, my exact voice, the way I sound to myself in my own head. It called my aunt's name again, and I realized it wasn't mimicking me in general. It was mimicking me calling out earlier when I'd said hello at the door. It had learned my voice and was using it. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just sat there, gripping the arms of the rocking chair so hard my knuckles went white. The voice called her name a 3rd time, then stopped. The breathing continued for another minute, then faded. The footsteps moved off the porch and into the yard, and I heard them stop somewhere out in the dark. I sat in that chair until the sky started to lighten, until I could see the tree line clearly and the yard was empty. When the sun finally came up full, I grabbed my bag, left everything else, and got in my car. I didn't look back at the cabin. I didn't lock the door. I just drove. When I got home, I found something in my overnight bag that I know wasn't there before. It was a small, flat piece of slate, smooth on one side. Scratched into it were 4 lines, finger marks, just like the ones on the windowsill. I never went back. I signed the property over to the county and told them to do whatever they wanted with it. Sometimes I think about Aunt Caroline, living up there alone for years, watching something at the tree line, hearing it knock. I think about that last entry in her notebook. It stood in the yard last night until I turned off the lamp. I think maybe she finally turned off the lamp for good. Story 2. My brother Ethan had been talking about the old Massey mine for months before we actually went. He'd gotten into urban exploration, he called it, though there wasn't anything urban about the mountains outside Pikeville. The Massey mine had been shut down since the 70s, and most of the entrance was collapsed. But Ethan swore there was a service tunnel further up the hillside that was still accessible. He'd seen photos online, people who'd been inside. He wanted to check it out before winter made the trails too muddy. I agreed to go mostly because I didn't want him going alone. Ethan was 22, stubborn, and had this way of ignoring danger like it wouldn't apply to him. I was 2 years older, and apparently hadn't learned that trying to protect him was a lost cause. We drove up on a Saturday morning in October, the leaves just starting to turn, the air crisp enough that you could see your breath. The trailhead wasn't marked. Ethan had GPS coordinates from some forum, and we parked his truck on the shoulder of a gravel road that didn't look like it got much use. The hike-in was steep, winding through thick woods that smelled like wet leaves and decay. Ethan talked the whole time about mines, about cave systems, about how Appalachia was full of places people had just forgotten about. I half listened, watching where I stepped, trying not to turn my ankle on loose rocks. It took us about 40 minutes to reach the tunnel entrance. It was smaller than I expected, maybe 5 feet high, framed by old rotting timbers that looked like they'd collapse if you leaned on them too hard. Ethan shone his flashlight inside, and the beam disappeared into darkness. Cool air breathed out of the opening, carrying a smell like stone and something faintly metallic. "This is it," Ethan said, grinning like he'd found buried treasure. I wasn't excited. I was already thinking about how we'd have to crouch to get in, how the ceiling could give way, how we'd be underground with no cell service and nobody knowing where we were. But Ethan was already ducking inside, so I followed. The tunnel was narrow, the walls slick with moisture. We had to hunch over, and our footsteps echoed strangely, like the space ahead of us was bigger than it should be. Ethan kept his flashlight trained forward, and I used my phone's light to check the walls and ceiling. After maybe 50 yards, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber. Old equipment was scattered around, rusted carts, pieces of track, a pickaxe with a broken handle. "This is so cool," Ethan said, his voice bouncing off the stone. I nodded, but I wasn't feeling it. Something about the space felt off. The air was too still and the smell was stronger here. Not just metal, something else. Something that made me think of roadkill left in the sun, but colder. He explored the chamber, taking photos, and Ethan found a side passage that led deeper. I didn't want to go further, but he was already heading in, and I wasn't about to let him go alone. This passage was tighter, the ceiling lower. We had to move single file, and I could feel the weight of the mountain pressing down above us. The passage curved, descended, and opened into another chamber, this one smaller and rougher, like it hadn't been carved by tools but by something else. That's when I saw them. On the far wall, scratched into the stone, were symbols. They weren't initials or dates like you'd expect from bored miners. They were deliberate, repeating patterns, circles with lines through them, something that looked like a hand with too many fingers, and words, or at least they looked like words, but I couldn't read them. The letters were wrong. "What the hell is that?" I said. Ethan moved closer, shining his light on the symbols. "No idea, maybe some kind of ritual thing. People used to believe in all sorts of stuff down here." I didn't like that explanation, but I didn't have a better one. I was about to suggest we head back when Ethan's light caught something in the corner of the chamber. It was a pile of clothes, or what was left of them. A jacket, torn and faded, a boot with no laces, and beneath them something pale. Ethan moved toward it, and I wanted to tell him to stop, but my voice stuck in my throat. He crouched down, reaching out, and then he jerked back. "There's something under here." "Don't touch it," I said, but he was already pulling the jacket aside. Beneath it was a rib cage, small, like from a dog or maybe a deer, but the bones were arranged wrong. They were stacked, interlocking, forming a kind of lattice, and in the center of the lattice was a flat rock with a symbol carved into it, the same hand with too many fingers. Ethan stood up fast, backing away. "Okay, yeah. We should go." I was already moving toward the passage, but then I heard it. A sound from deeper in the chamber, from a gap in the wall I hadn't noticed before. It was rhythmic, breathing, but too slow, too deep, like something much larger than a person. Ethan heard it too. His light swung toward the gap, and for a second I saw movement. Something pale shifting in the darkness, something that pulled back from the light like it didn't want to be seen. We ran. I don't remember the passage clearly. I remember crouching, stumbling, Ethan ahead of me, our lights bouncing wildly off the walls. I remember the sound behind us, not footsteps exactly, but something dragging, something that scraped and shuffled and was moving faster than it should. We burst into the first chamber, and Ethan was shouting, "Go, go, go." And we ran for the tunnel entrance, hunched over, my shoulders hitting the walls, my lungs burning. We reached daylight and kept running down the trail, slipping on leaves, my ankle twisting, but I didn't stop. We didn't stop until we reached the truck, and Ethan fumbled with the keys, and we got in, and he drove us down that gravel road so fast I thought we'd flip. We didn't talk about it that day, or the next, but a week later, Ethan called me, his voice tight. "I checked my photos," he said, "from the mine. And there's one I don't remember taking. It's from inside the second chamber, looking back toward the entrance, toward us." He sent it to me. I opened it and my stomach dropped. The photo was taken from the gap in the wall looking out. You could see Ethan and me in the frame, our backs to the camera, standing by the bone pile. And in the foreground, in the bottom corner of the image, you could see the edge of something. A hand, pale, elongated fingers resting on the stone, like whatever took the photo had been holding the phone. But Ethan's phone never left his pocket. Story 3. I moved to Wayland, Kentucky for a job at a timber company, which sounds more impressive than it was. I was basically doing logistics, paperwork, coordinating shipments, making sure the right trees got cut and the right trucks showed up. The town was small, maybe 800 people if you counted generously, and most of those people had been there for generations. I was an outsider, which was fine. I wasn't looking to make friends. I was looking for cheap rent and a paycheck. The house I rented was at the edge of town, past the dollar store and the Baptist church, where the road turned to dirt and the houses spread out. It was a single-story place with peeling paint and a yard full of weeds, but the rent was $300 a month, so I didn't complain. The landlord was a man named Vernon who barely said 10 words when he handed me the keys. He mentioned something about the root cellar out back being locked, said I shouldn't mess with it, and that was that. I didn't think about the root cellar for the first 2 weeks. I was busy settling in, learning my roots, figuring out where to buy groceries. But one evening in late November, I was taking out the trash and I noticed the cellar door for the first time. It was one of those old storm shelter-style doors, angled into the ground, the wood swollen and gray with age. There was a new padlock on it, shiny and out of place against the rot. I didn't know why, but seeing it made my mouth go dry. I stood there with the trash bag in my hand, staring at it, and I felt this pull, this urge to open it. Not curiosity exactly, something else. I shook it off and went back inside. That night I heard the tapping. It was faint, rhythmic, coming from somewhere below the house. At first I thought it was pipes, but the sound was too deliberate. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, tap. I got out of bed and walked through the house, trying to pinpoint it, and realized it was coming from the floor in the kitchen, right near the back door, right above where the root cellar would be. I stood there in my boxers and a t-shirt, listening, and the tapping stopped. I waited for it to start again, but it didn't. I told myself it was nothing, houses settle, animals get underneath, and I went back to bed. The tapping came back the next night, and the next. Always around 2 in the morning, always in the kitchen. On the 4th night, I crouched down and put my ear to the floor, and I heard something else beneath the tapping. A voice, faint, muffled, but definitely a voice. It sounded like it was calling out, like someone was down there. That morning I called Vernon. "There's something in the root cellar," I said. "It's locked," he said. "Leave it locked. Someone might be down there. I hear tapping, voices." "You don't hear nothing," Vernon interrupted. "Leave it alone." He hung up. I tried to focus on work, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. I asked around town, casually, about the house. Most people didn't know much, but an older woman at the gas station, Darla, gave me a look when I mentioned the address. "That house has been trouble," she said. "Family that lived there before you left in the middle of the night didn't take nothing with them." "Why?" She shook her head. "People don't talk about it, but if I were you, I'd find somewhere else." I didn't find somewhere else. I stayed, partly out of stubbornness, partly because I couldn't afford to break the lease. But that night I decided I was going to check the cellar. I waited until it was full dark, then I went out back with a flashlight and a crowbar I'd bought at the hardware store. The padlock was solid, but the wood around the latch was soft. I pried at it, and after a few minutes, the whole fixture pulled free with a crack that sounded too loud in the quiet. I pulled the door open and a smell hit me. Not rot, not decay, but something stale and cold, like air that had been trapped for years. The stairs leading down were stone, slick with moisture. I shone my light down and the beam didn't reach the bottom. I almost didn't go. I stood there holding the door open, every instinct screaming at me to close it and walk away. But I needed to know. I started down. The stairs were steeper than they looked, and the walls closed in on both sides. At the bottom, the cellar opened into a small space, maybe 10 by 10 feet. The floor was dirt, the walls stone, and covering every surface were scratches. Deep gouges in the stone, chaotic and layered, like something had been clawing at the walls for a very long time. In the center of the space was a wooden chair, old and rotted, and on the chair was a piece of paper, yellowed and curled at the edges. I picked it up, and written on it in shaky handwriting were the words, "It will call to you. Do not answer, do not open the door." I heard movement behind me. I spun around, shining the light toward the stairs, and I saw something pale rising through the gap where the cellar door stood open. A bare shoulder streaked with dirt, an arm reaching up, pulling itself toward the opening. It moved in a way that didn't make sense, like its joints bent in too many places. I ran for the stairs, but it was already blocking the way. I saw its face, or the suggestion of one, smooth and featureless except for a mouth that split too wide. I stumbled backward, dropped the flashlight, and scrambled for the far corner of the cellar. My hand hit something sharp, and I realized I was pressed against the wall, the scratches digging into my back. The thing descended the stairs slowly, its movements deliberate. It didn't make a sound. When it reached the bottom, it stood there, tilting its head like it was trying to understand what I was. Then it spoke, my voice again, words I'd said earlier that day. "There's something in the root cellar." It stepped closer, and I could see its skin was stretched too tight, almost translucent. I could see the shape of bones underneath, moving wrong. I pressed harder against the wall, my breath coming in short gasps, and then I felt it, a draft. The wall behind me wasn't solid. There was a gap, a crack just wide enough. I squeezed through, scraping my shoulders, and found myself in a narrow passage I hadn't seen before. I didn't think. I just crawled, dragging myself through the dirt, feeling the walls press in on both sides. Behind me, I heard it following, that dragging, scraping sound. The passage angled up, and I saw light, moonlight filtering through gaps in the ground. I clawed my way toward it, pulling myself up through what must have been an old vent or a collapsed section, and I emerged in the yard, maybe 20 feet from the cellar door. I ran to my car, started it, and drove. I didn't go back for my things. I didn't call Vernon. I just left. A week later, I got a text from an unknown number. It was a photo of my living room, taken from inside the house. The lights were off, but you could see the furniture, the TV, my jacket still draped over the couch. And standing in the doorway to the kitchen, barely visible in the shadows, was something tall and pale, its head tilted, staring at the camera. I never found out who sent it. Story 4. I didn't want to go to Uncle Thomas's funeral, which probably makes me sound like a terrible person, but we weren't close. He lived alone in a cabin outside Heinemann, and I'd only met him twice when I was a kid. He was my mother's older brother, and she described him as a hermit but harmless. When he died, they found him 3 days later, natural causes. I was surprised to learn he'd left me something in his will. A box. Not the cabin, not money, just a wooden box that had been sitting on his mantle. The lawyer said Thomas had specifically requested I receive it, and nobody else. My mother was annoyed, my cousins were confused, but I was curious, so I drove to Heinemann in early December to pick it up. The lawyer's office was in a building that looked like it used to be a house, and he handed me the box without ceremony. It was about the size of a shoebox, made of dark wood, with a sliding lid that fit tight. There was no lock, no markings. I opened it right there, and inside was a collection of objects that made no sense together. A compass with a cracked glass face, a photograph of a forest, no people, just trees, a small leather pouch tied with string, and a folded piece of paper. I opened the paper. It was a hand-drawn map, rough but detailed, showing a trail that led from a marked road into the woods. At the end of the trail was an X and a single word, "Don't." The lawyer cleared his throat. "Your uncle left a note with the box. He said if you wanted to understand, you'd have to go there yourself. If you didn't, you should burn it all." I stared at the map, at that single word, and I felt something tighten in my chest. I thanked the lawyer and left, taking the box with me. I should have burned it, I know that now, but I didn't. I spent that evening in a motel room, turning the objects over in my hands. The compass needle spun lazily, never settling. The photograph was old, the edges brown with age, and the trees in it looked wrong, somehow too uniform. The pouch was heavy, and when I opened it I found soil. Just dark, fine soil that smelled faintly of smoke. I couldn't stop looking at the map. The road it marked was only about 10 miles from where I was. I told myself I was being stupid, but this was some weird final joke Thomas was playing, but I couldn't let it go. The next morning, I drove to the road. It was barely a road, more like a logging track, overgrown and pitted with holes. I parked and started walking, following the map. The trail was faint, winding uphill through dense forest. The trees here were old, massive oaks and hemlocks that blocked most of the light. It was cold, and my breath fogged in front of me, but I kept going. After about a mile, I found the first marker. It was a cairn, a stack of stones, deliberate and precise. Sitting on top of the cairn was a small wooden figure, carved roughly into the shape of a person. I picked it up. It was smooth, worn by weather, and on the back was the same word from the map, burned into the wood: don't. I put it back and kept walking. I found 3 more cairns over the next half mile, each with a figure on top, each with that word. By the time I reached the 4th, I was starting to feel uneasy. The forest was too quiet. No birds, no wind, just my footsteps and my breathing. The trail ended at a clearing. In the center of the clearing was a stone structure, maybe 4 feet high, like a well without a cover. I approached it slowly, and when I looked inside, I saw steps leading down into darkness. I should have turned back. Every part of me that wasn't stupidly curious was screaming to leave. But I pulled out my phone, turned on the flashlight, and started down. The steps were steep and uneven, carved directly into the stone. The air grew colder as I descended, and I could hear water dripping somewhere below. At the bottom, the passage opened into a chamber. It was small, the ceiling low, and the walls were covered in writing, not English. Symbols like the ones I'd seen in the photograph, carved deep into the stone. In the center of the chamber was a wooden post driven into the ground, and tied to the post with fraying rope was a piece of cloth. I moved closer and realized it wasn't cloth. It was skin. Old, dried, stretched over a frame like a drum. I stumbled back, my light swinging wildly, and that's when I saw the figures. They were carved into the walls, dozens of them, the same wooden shape as the cairn markers, each one facing inward toward the post, and beneath each figure that word: don't. I turned to leave, and something moved at the edge of my light. I froze. There, at the top of the steps, standing just inside the passage, was a shape. It was tall, impossibly thin, and it didn't move like a person. It swayed slightly like it was testing the air, and then it tilted its head in a way that made my stomach drop. It started down the steps. I backed into the chamber, looking for another way out, but there wasn't one. The thing moved slowly, deliberately, and I could hear its joints clicking with every step. When it reached the bottom, it stopped, just standing there, and I saw its face, or the lack of one. It was smooth, blank, except for a mouth that opened far too wide, showing nothing inside but darkness. I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed the wooden post and pulled. It came free with a crack, and the moment it did, the thing recoiled. It made a sound, a high, keening wail that echoed off the walls, and it scrambled back up the steps, moving faster than anything that size should move. I didn't wait to see if it was gone. I ran up the steps, out into the clearing, and I didn't stop running until I reached my car. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely get the key in the ignition. When I got back to the motel, I checked my bag. The box was still there, but the objects inside were different. The compass was gone. The photograph was blank, and the map had new writing on it, in handwriting I didn't recognize. You shouldn't have pulled the post. I left Kentucky that night and drove 12 hours straight. I burned the box and everything in it when I got home. But sometimes, late at night, I hear that wail, distant but getting closer. Story 5. My best friend Hannah and I decided to hike the Shelterby Trace Trail for her 30th birthday. It was her idea. She'd been talking about doing a multi-day hike for years, and I'd always made excuses. But 30 felt significant, and I wanted to do something meaningful with her. So I agreed, even though the idea of being in the woods for 3 days made me anxious. I'm more of a city person. I like pavement and cell service. We started the hike on a Friday morning in mid-October. The weather was perfect, cool, clear, leaves just starting to turn. The first day went smoothly. We covered about 8 miles, set up camp near a creek, and spent the evening talking by the fire. Hannah was in her element. She kept pointing out plants, animal tracks, the way the light filtered through the trees. I tried to share her enthusiasm, but mostly I was just tired and sore. The second day was harder. The trail got steeper, rockier, and we lost the path twice. By the time we found a place to camp, it was almost dark, and we were both exhausted. We set up the tent quickly, ate a cold dinner, and crawled into our sleeping bags. I woke up sometime in the middle of the night, and Hannah was sitting up, her headlamp on, staring at the tent wall. "What's wrong?" I whispered. "Do you hear that?" I listened. At first I didn't hear anything, but then I did. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling the tent, not the soft pad of an animal, the crunch of boots on leaves. "Someone's out there," Hannah said. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent flap, shining the light out into the trees. The beam cut through the darkness, but I didn't see anyone. The footsteps stopped. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded small and stupid in the silence. No answer. Hannah pulled me back into the tent. "Maybe it's another hiker." At 3 in the morning. We sat there listening, but the footsteps didn't come back. Eventually we lay back down, but I didn't sleep. I kept straining to hear, my heart pounding, waiting for the sound to return. In the morning we packed up quickly and checked the area around the tent. There were footprints in the soft dirt near the tree line. Boot prints, larger than mine or Hannah's, with a tread pattern that looked old-fashioned, almost military. But there was only one set, no trail leading to them, no trail leading away. Hannah took a photo of them, and we agreed to keep moving. We didn't talk about it much, but I could tell she was rattled. So it was the third day we were supposed to hike out, but we took a wrong turn somewhere and ended up on a side trail that wasn't on our map. We didn't realize it at first. Trails in that area all look similar, winding through thick forest, but after an hour Hannah stopped and pulled out the map. "This doesn't match," she said, frowning. We backtracked, but the main trail had disappeared. We tried using the compass, but the needle kept swinging, never settling on north. Hannah's phone was dead and mine had no signal. We kept walking, hoping to find something familiar, but the forest felt wrong. The trees were too dense, the undergrowth too thick. It was like the trail had closed behind us. By late afternoon we were lost and starting to panic. That's when we found the cabin. It was small, one room, made of logs that were gray with age. The roof sagged in the middle, and the windows were boarded up. It looked abandoned, but when we got closer, I saw smoke rising from the chimney. Someone was inside. Hannah knocked on the door. "Hello, we are lost. Can you help us?" No answer. She knocked again, harder. "Please, we just need directions." The door opened slowly, and I stepped back. Standing in the doorway was a man, or I think it was a man. He was tall, hunched, wearing clothes that looked like they were from another century. His face was shadowed, but I could see his eyes. They were pale, almost colorless, and they didn't blink. "Lost," he said. His voice was flat, emotionless. "Yes," Hannah said. "We're trying to get back to the shelter we trace. Can you point us in the right direction?" He stared at her for a long moment, then stepped aside, gesturing for us to come in. I didn't want to go inside, but Hannah was already moving forward, and I wasn't going to let her go alone. The cabin was dim, lit only by a fire in a stone hearth. There was a table, a chair, and a narrow bed in the corner. No decorations, no personal items. It smelled like earth and something sour. "Sit," the man said, pointing to the table. We sat. He stood by the fire, not looking at us, just staring into the flames. "How do we get back to the trail?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. "You walked off the path. The path doesn't come back." "What does that mean?" Hannah said. He turned to look at her, and I saw his face clearly for the first time. His skin was stretched too tight, almost gray, and there was something wrong with his mouth. It didn't move when he spoke, like the voice was coming from somewhere else. "You're in the fold now," he said. "The woods keep what enters." I stood up. "We are leaving." Hannah stood too, and we moved toward the door. The man didn't try to stop us, but as we reached the threshold, he spoke again. "She stays." I turned. He was pointing at Hannah. "No," I said. "We are both leaving." He smiled then, and it was the worst thing I've ever seen. His mouth split too wide, showing teeth that were too many and too sharp. Hannah grabbed my arm and we ran. We crashed through the trees, branches tearing at our clothes, and I didn't look back. We ran until I couldn't breathe, until my legs gave out, and then we collapsed in a hollow between two large rocks. We stayed there until dawn. When the light came, we found the main trail less than 100 yards away. We hiked out in silence, not stopping until we reached the trailhead parking lot. When we got home, Hannah checked the photos she'd taken of the boot prints. They were gone. The image file was corrupted, just a blank gray square. But I still have dreams about that cabin, about the man with the too wide smile. And sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I hear his voice. She stays. Story 6. I worked as a contractor, mostly small jobs, deck repairs, drywall, that kind of thing. In March, I got a call from a woman named Iris Calloway who needed help with a property she'd inherited near Boonville. She said the house had been empty for years, and she wanted to clean it out and sell it. The job was simple: replace some rotted boards on the porch, patch holes in the walls, make it presentable. The pay was decent, and I needed the work, so I agreed. Iris gave me directions and said she'd meet me there on a Tuesday morning. The house was about 30 minutes outside town, down a dirt road that wound through thick woods. When I arrived, Iris was already there, standing in the driveway with her arms crossed. She was maybe 50, thin, with gray streaks in her dark hair. She looked tired. "Thanks for coming," she said, shaking my hand. "I know it's out of the way." "No problem," I said, looking at the house. It was old, 2 stories, with faded blue paint and a porch that sagged dangerously on one side. "How long has it been empty?" "About 10 years," she said. "My uncle lived here before that. He was well. Toward the end he got paranoid, wouldn't let anyone visit." She showed me around, pointing out the areas that needed work. Most of it was straightforward, though I could tell the house had been neglected for a long time. The inside smelled like mildew, and the floors creaked under every step. Iris didn't come inside with me. She stayed in the yard, making phone calls, checking her email. I started on the porch, pulling up the rotten boards and measuring for replacements. As I worked, I noticed something odd. There were scratches on the door frame, deep gouges in the wood, clustered around the doorknob, like something had been trying to get in or out. I was about to ask Iris about it when I heard a sound from inside the house. A thump like something heavy dropping on the floor above me. I paused listening, but it didn't come again. I assumed it was the house settling or maybe an animal that had gotten in through a broken window. I went back to work, but the sound kept coming. Irregular. Sometimes a thump, sometimes a scraping noise like furniture being dragged. I finally went inside to check, climbing the stairs to the 2nd floor. The hallway was dim, the wallpaper peeling, and I could see 3 doors all closed. I opened the first door. It was a bedroom, empty except for a rusted bed frame, nothing out of place. The second door led to a bathroom, same story. The third door was at the end of the hall, and when I reached for the knob, it was warm. I opened it, and the room beyond was different from the others. It was cleaner, almost preserved. The bed was made, the furniture intact, and covering the walls were papers, hundreds of them, taped up in overlapping layers. I stepped inside, and I realized they were drawings. Crude, repetitive sketches of the same thing. A figure with elongated limbs and no face, standing in the doorway of this room. In every drawing, the figure was a little closer. I heard the sound again directly behind me. I spun around and the door was closed. I hadn't closed it. I grabbed the knob and pulled, but it wouldn't open. I yanked harder, panic rising in my chest, and then I heard breathing. Slow, deliberate, coming from the corner of the room. I turned, shining my phone's light toward the corner. There was nothing there, but the breathing didn't stop. It moved, circling the room, and I backed against the door, my hand still on the knob. Then I felt it, something cold touching the back of my neck, fingers pressing lightly against my skin. I screamed and threw myself against the door. It opened suddenly, and I stumbled into the hallway, falling hard on the floor. I scrambled to my feet and ran down the stairs, out the front door, and into the yard. Iris looked up from her phone, startled. What happened? I couldn't answer right away. I was shaking, my breath coming in gasps. When I finally told her, she went pale. "The third room," she said quietly. "My uncle locked himself in there the night he died. They found him sitting on the bed, facing the door. His eyes were open, but he was gone." I left that day and never went back. Iris called me a few days later, asking if I'd changed my mind, but I told her to find someone else. She didn't argue. A week later, she texted me a photo. It was from inside the third room, taken after she'd had another contractor start cleaning it out. The walls were stripped bare, the papers gone. But on the floor in the corner where I'd heard the breathing, there was a handprint. A single, large handprint pressed into the dust. The fingers were too long, and there were 6 of them. Iris sold the property to a demolition company. They tore the house down, and as far as I know, nothing has been built there since. Story 7. I took the job as a fire watch for the summer because I wanted isolation. I'd just gone through a bad breakup, and the idea of spending 3 months alone in a tower in the Daniel Boone National Forest sounded perfect. No people, no phones, no reminders, just me, the trees, and a radio. The tower was in a remote section near the Red River Gorge. accessible only by a 2-mile hike from the nearest logging road. They gave me supplies, a manual, and a stern warning about not leaving the tower unattended. Fires could start fast, they said, and every minute mattered. I promised I'd take it seriously, and I meant it. The first week was exactly what I needed. Quiet, repetitive, peaceful. I'd wake up, scan the horizon for smoke, make notes in the log, read, sleep. The tower was small but functional. A single room with windows on all sides, a cot, a desk, a propane stove. At night, the stars were so bright, it felt like I could reach up and touch them. The second week, I started noticing things. It began with the radio. I'd hear static bursts at odd hours, sometimes in the middle of the night. I'd check, thinking someone was trying to reach me, but the radio was off. I assumed it was interference, maybe from weather, and I didn't think much of it. Then I found the footprints. They were around the base of the tower, circling it in a slow spiral. Bare feet pressed deep into the dirt. I stared at them for a long time, trying to rationalize. Maybe another hiker had passed through, though I hadn't seen anyone. Maybe someone from the Forest Service had come to check on me. But the prints didn't lead anywhere. They just circled the tower and stopped. That night I heard tapping on the platform outside. I was lying on the cot, half asleep, and the sound pulled me awake. It was rhythmic, deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. Pause, tap, tap, tap. I grabbed my flashlight and went to the window, shining the light down at the ladder. There was nothing there. I checked all 4 sides, but the platform was empty. The tapping stopped. I stood there for a long time listening, and then I heard it again, this time from above. I looked up at the ceiling, and the tapping moved slow and deliberate, like something walking across the roof. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning I radioed base and told them what I'd heard. The operator sounded bored. He said animals sometimes climb the towers, raccoons, possums, and I shouldn't worry. I wanted to believe him, but I knew what I'd heard. That wasn't an animal. The tapping came back every night, always the same pattern, always above me. On the 5th night I climbed the ladder to the roof to check. The roof was flat metal and there was nothing up there, but in the center, scratched into the metal, was a symbol. A circle with lines radiating outward, like a crude drawing of the sun. I hadn't seen it before. I climbed back down and locked the hatch. I told myself I'd finish the week and then request a transfer. But the next night I woke up to find the hatch open. I hadn't opened it. I was sure I'd locked it. I climbed the ladder slowly, shining my flashlight up through the opening. The roof was empty, but standing at the edge looking down at me was a figure. It was tall, impossibly thin, and its skin was pale, almost luminous in the moonlight. It didn't move. It just stood there, its head tilted, and I realized it had no face. No eyes, no mouth, just smooth, blank skin. I scrambled back down the ladder and slammed the hatch shut, locking it and dragging the desk over to block it. I sat on the cot, clutching my flashlight, and I waited for dawn. The figure didn't leave. I could hear it moving on the roof, slow dragging sounds, and once I heard it tap on the hatch. 3 times, the same pattern as before. When the sun came up, I radioed base and told them I was leaving. I packed my bag and climbed down the ladder, not looking back at the roof. I hiked the 2 miles to the logging road, and I didn't stop until I reached my truck. I quit the next day. They tried to convince me to stay, said I'd lose my pay, but I didn't care. I just wanted out. A month later, I got a letter from the Forest Service. They said another fire watch had been assigned to my tower, but after 3 days, he'd disappeared. They found his gear, his radio, but no sign of him. In his final log entry, he'd written, "Something is on the roof. It won't leave. I think it wants inside." They shut down the tower after that. As far as I know, it's still standing, empty, with that symbol scratched into the metal. Sometimes I wonder if it's still waiting up there. And sometimes, late at night, I hear tapping on my apartment ceiling. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed these stories, hit that like button and subscribe for more. Let me know in the comments which story unsettled you most, and share this with your friends who love a good scare. Until next time, stay safe out there.